panel is moderated by John Robinett and includes Mark Dvorchak, Managing Partner, Proforma Advisors, Matt Earnest, Co-founder and Principal, ECA, and Mike Oswald, Executive Vice President of ProFund Management Group and a Principal at Management Resources. And here's the panel.
So we've got a variety of things to talk about, but Anne Herzog brought up the idea of terrorism and security issues in the industry. And you may have read the paper today, but the first time ever in the world an attraction was attacked by terrorists yesterday at the Bardo National Museum in Tunis, in Tunisia, and 20 people were killed. 18 of them were foreign tourists. So it's obviously going to have a strong impact on that particular institution and tourism to Tunisia in general, which was, among the Arab Spring countries, Tunisia was settled down enough and had transitioned into a sort of democratic country, such that tourists from Europe felt comfortable going there. I mean, there were French and German and British tourists at this museum yesterday. So why don't we start with that? I know it's not a very pleasant topic, but I think it's probably timely. What do you guys think? I know, Mike, you spent some time in the Middle East, didn't you? And you guys had to pull some guys out of Egypt, I understand. What do you? Mike's probably been in the Middle East longer than any of us, so you actually lived there, right?
Yeah, I lived 6 years in Abu Dhabi, working on the beautifully designed JRA Ferrari World theme park, as well as Yas Water World. And it's a very interesting time living there. But when you start looking at some of these things, we had a team, of 6 people in Egypt working on a park, Susanna Mubarak Park. We're about 2 weeks from opening. And next thing you know, you have riots going on in the city, and everything starts to shut down. So our people made a run for the airport, and a few dollars paid here and there, and they were fortunate enough to get out and come spend some time with us in Abu Dhabi. So it is something that you have to be concerned about as an operator. And when I look at the projects in the UAE in particular, because those are what I'm familiar with, they spend a lot of time and a lot of emphasis on security to ensure that those types of terrorism attacks do not occur in those countries. I would tell you, in my 6 years there, that's probably the safest place I've ever lived. My family would be able to testify to that. I mean, there's not a time when I walk down the street at 3 in the morning I ever felt threatened or nervous. You leave your cars unlocked and nobody steals anything. But they take it very seriously. For example, in our theme parks, Yas Water World and Ferrari World in particular, we probably had 20 times the number of cameras that you would normally expect in a theme park or a water park of that scale.
Security cameras, not people.
Yeah, security cameras. You're talking 400 to 500 security cameras in each facility. We had quite a few anti-terrorism experts coming, evaluating the property. So they do take it very, very seriously because they are very concerned about it.
Well, I'm glad they're thinking of it already. But what about museums? I mean, museums seem to have a lower level of security than parks because they tend to be more open. Did you guys deal with any museums when you were over there?
Yeah, we worked on some of the museums that are coming up in Abu Dhabi, and they're not quite open yet, but they are very high-profile museums that are in the works with from foreign let's call them IPs. So they did take that very, very seriously because they cannot afford to open a major museum in the region and have any kind of issues relating to it. They have already had some issues with protests relating to worker conditions, which, speaking firsthand, most of the projects I've seen, the workers are very well taken care of compared to other places in the world that I've worked or visited. But yeah, they take it very seriously and want to ensure that guests that come there feel safe and secure.
Okay, great. Well, that's a nice focus on the Middle East in particular. Mark, Matt, what do you guys think about maybe more the broader implications of this?
Sure. I think when you look at from the IT perspective, so we look at licensors, particularly the studios that are looking at new projects in that region, it does give them pause We've done some recent work in Turkey, and there's markets like Istanbul, which is a very promising market for large-scale tract development. But given the current state of the politics, putting a large visitor attraction with a Western brand suddenly becomes a concern. Does this become a target just by virtue of how it's defined and perceived in the market? And that has stopped some projects from moving forward while they wait for some of the politics and the unrest to settle. And so we've seen projects put on hold for fear that the wrong brands are introduced into the wrong places at the wrong time.
So that's an interesting perspective, that there might be some caution on behalf of the actual investors and brand providers into the projects because of these incidents. Mark, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it was interesting. We had a little prelude to that question coming, so I had a chance to think in the break, and Matt asked me, well, how do you actually consider a terrorist attack or the potential terrorist attack in your study? And I gave it a little bit of thinking, and it's interesting. Projects that we look at, and all the projects in the industry, really are still long-term. If they're going to be financially feasible, they have to work over the long term. And a lot of times, you are kind of going up and down on what's happening, what's happening today, or if there's a crisis. So we consider that in the project, but we always like to step back and say, listen, if you may be in a recession today, but usually you come out of it. And whether it may get pushed off when you develop it, but if the fundamentals are there, it has to work over the long haul. So we like to kind of always, mute some of that, day to day. I think you're right. There's some political issues of, we can't be seen doing that, but it's got to work over a 20, 30-year period. If you're worried that there's going to be that kind of unrest for 20 or 30 years, the project may not happen.
Right. I think it's that some projects were actually teed up, but they said, well, let's wait a year or wait 2 years,
Right.
Because they believe in the long-term fundamentals. It's just, relative to their managing their brands, they're managing their perception for these projects. They're going to be careful.
Well, it's interesting, Mark, that you mentioned a long term. We've actually done a number of studies looking at the impact of civil unrest, terrorism, natural disasters, and that sort of thing. And we picked a lot. We looked at 9/11. We looked at, I think there was a civil unrest in Fiji for a while, which is a big tourist market. The San Francisco earthquake. We compiled all of these things together, and we looked at what happened to tourism. And it was so amazing that it all had the same curve. The tourism is growing like this, and then you have the incident, and for every single one of these guys, and we use quite a few examples, there's an immediate drop-off in tourism. In a major incident, it drops about 30%, and it took about 3 years to recover, back to where it was before the drop. But if you can think of that visually, it recovered to where it was before. If the incident hadn't happened, tourism would have kept going up. So there's this loss, permanent loss of tourism expenditures that occurs. But it does tend to bounce back after a few years, we discovered. So over the long term, I mean, Mark, you're right. It will come back, but there might be some displacement of expenditures, I think, in the tourism industry as these incidents occur. And I noticed, I guess the parks in North America, they have more security than they did before. I was just at Disneyland a couple weeks ago, and they have kind of light security light where they just look at your bag going in. Have you guys experienced that? Higher security in the parks?
Yeah, I think when you look at the level of sophistication in the systems that are now available to try to evaluate possible threats. I mean, from the guest perspective, you see that it looks very similar. You have a couple guys out there checking your bag, but a lot of these facilities that are very high profile are employing new technologies which are behind the scenes, help them evaluate it. So, they're able to keep that light touch with the guest, but then be able to handle possible issues.
Behind the scenes, there's an invisible cordon, so to speak. Yep.
I think one thought too that what might be different moving forward versus not. I mean, I'm not in operations, and obviously there's a whole skill set to that. But the social media aspect, before it was like an actual incident, trying to grow this, but now there's such a skill level and this connectivity in social media that you see this, I hate to say it, a quality level maybe scare more easily without actually having to do anything. You know, you just put it out. Will that impact attendance?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's more sensitive then. How about everyone in the audience? Any thoughts about this? No.
Yeah, right there.
Oh, is that Ann?
That seems really substantial to me. I mean, is anyone else phased by that?
Well, it is a big drop. And when you looked at the market in Orlando after 9/11, one of the things they had to do to try to maintain attendance was the yield off of their prices. Essentially, the discounters they were offering increased substantially, and it was across the board. So typically, there's tiering in the industry where some of the leaders don't have to discount as much. Disney's Universal versus some of the regional parks. But because of the drop in the tourism volume, they needed to help drive that. And so even the people at the top of the industry take a big haircut on discounting, trying to drive and keep that attendance. And so while you might have seen less of a dip in attendance relative to tourism volume, because they paid the price with discounting. And so there's a lot of sort of financial loss relative to that sacrifice to drive those metrics that come from that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the attractions have to obviously react. And Matt's right. I mean, you probably remember that during the recession and after 9/11, they're giving away season passes at the parks basically for free. So just to try to get bodies in the door.
Now, one alternate perspective of that too, when you had something so high profile, some of the bigger places that you had to fly to actually, you know, had big drops, but that was actually offset. You know, there were a lot more smaller trips or shorter trips.
Right.
So people that would go for a weekend drive, that actually increased after 9/11 in certain places.
Vacation. That's something Matt had said earlier, that what might occur during an incident somewhere is that the tourist markets will redistribute a bit, like they did, you know, in the 9/11 and the recession. People went to shorter length of stay, closer, cheaper attractions or resorts.
Like a Great Wolf Lodge actually did very well during the recession.
Well, some of the museums did too, because they're close to home and they're cheaper. So you might get this redistribution effect that occurs as these incidents happen.
Yeah, and that happened significantly in Dubai during the Arab Spring, right? There was a lot of Europeans and Asians and everybody that had trips planned, and they were going to Egypt, for example, and then the unrest occurred, and they diverted to another location, which happened to be Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So, yeah, they do. It tends to might hurt one area, but could help another.
Right. Good point. Anyone else?
A question for the audience and the designers that I would find interesting, being on the economic side, was anyone asked by somebody to design an attraction differently or a building differently,
Or an entry complex.
features bigger, you know, anything like that? Have you seen it on the design side in addition to the development side?
I don't see anyone. So it looks like it's a very fresh topic for
Dan's shaking his head out there. You want to say it?
The arrival sequence always has to be studied now. So it's an unfortunate reality that we have to deal with now. So, but again, it's trying to balance the security needs with the sense of arrival we want to create that makes people feel comfortable and safe and excited about the experience. So a big part of our arrival sequence design process is how do we take care of both extremes in a way that's seamless but still effective.
Right.
And as you mentioned before, we also always have to engage a security expert early in the process now to make sure what we're doing makes sense. And a lot of times, even the layout of the park on a piece of property may have something to do with how things are done, because it's trying to cut access going into the park from water, let's say, or different aspects of that on the site itself. So unfortunately, all that becomes part of the planning exercise very early in the process.
That's interesting, Dan. So maybe it's an emerging growth area sector of our businesses, you know, security for attractions, and facing greater threats than we've had in the past. So.
John, I just had one other comment, looking at something that's related but slightly sideways. We do a lot of events for large-scale sports operations. And we recently were up at Levi Stadium, project managing the outdoor hockey game that happened up there on the 21st of February. And that's a brand new football stadium. The whole security, screening, which always used to look very temporary, like it might go away for some events and might be there for other events, looks much more permanent and integrated at that venue. And for sure, the screening that they were doing as we were going in was like I had to open my wallet. I had to take my wallet out of my purse and open my wallet. And any zippered container inside, whatever you were carrying, you had to, now if I'd had a bottle of booze down my cowboy boots, they wouldn't have found it. But they made me open my wallet. And now that's a much higher level, and it's much more integrated. And those events, that event, Homeland Security was there, they were watching what's going on, and the terror threat level for a large gathering of people like that is really, really high for that day, for that event, in that venue. And that's the kind of attention that those events get. So it's certainly changed for those types of large gatherings.
Right. I think it's a reality that we're facing. I know at the football stadiums in LA, there was a comment by Homeland Security that one site's under the airport, so someone could, drive a plane into the stadium. I don't know if that would happen or not, but so I would think it's a reality in not just this industry but others, and the consumers are getting more accustomed to it. So hopefully it doesn't have any sort of large effect on our industry. It's just we have to account for it in operations.
Might be an interesting opportunity. Themed metal detectors.
Yeah. There you go.
Obviously that's hyperbole, but
it's immersive.
Being able to incorporate that as could be actually an interesting
part of the business.
How do you design security in a themed, immersive environment?
Right. There you go. Right. Gang members,
Surprised anyone got it.
Right. Gang members, terrorists, hockey fans, all high threat categories.
All right, well, great. Why don't we move on to another more cheery topic? One of the things we want.
Public health.
One of the things we wanted to talk about was Disney Shanghai and how that might impact the Chinese and Asian tourist market. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? How Disney's going to move the needle there?
Sure. This has been talked about quite a bit, but it's important to revisit, particularly as we get closer to the opening of the park. I think a lot of people in the industry sort of see this as, they've called it the next chapter, chapter 2 for the Chinese theme park industry. And I think it really focuses on how attractions and clustering attractions is a complementary business, in that multiple attractions, if they're well differentiated, are not substitutes for each other. They're complements. And that when you introduce a new level of attraction that introduces a new quality level, a new price level, a new level of service, that focuses the market to respond. And so I think there's been lots of speculation as to how the China market will respond to a complete new tier of theme park product. And there's sort of two aspects to this. First, I think we'll talk about the general aspect, and then we'll talk about just some crazy budgets for this. But I think the first is really elevating the expectations for the experience and the price. I think pricing has been a challenge in China for probably two reasons. One is when you look at that first generation of parks, they're more value-oriented family and regional parks, and they came up at a time when incomes were growing, and those price points, while they've been rising, were set to a different reference point. Also, pricing in China is difficult in that there's a lot of tourism and travel that's put through tour operators. And tour operators take a significant commission, which is a different dynamic than in other developed economies where you have your independent traveler who's paying directly. And I think that's also sort of constrained a little bit of the take that allows that level of investment, that level of return from each guest when that tour operator controls some of that pricing dynamic. And so, I mean, the first thing that I took forward for discussion is not only does it introduce a new pricing level, but it gives everyone else an opportunity to use that as a reference price. So their experience doesn't, may not match the Disney price because they don't offer the Disney experience, but they can elevate their pricing potential because suddenly there's a new reference in the market for what the top end of the price is. And that pricing allows for potentially more revenue, which allows for reinvestment, which will be necessary for them to keep up and compete. And hopefully that then creates this virtuous cycle of higher prices, better returns, more reinvestment, and then the tide, so to speak, rises across a broad range of projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Mike, I know when they opened Disneyland Paris, I was working on that project, and all the local operators were afraid they were just going to disappear off the map when Disneyland came in. But what happened was Disney trained up all of these operational and management staff to a new level, kind of like Matt was saying for the pricing. And then those guys split for the local attractions and fixed the local attractions, so it's sort of a win-win. You think that could happen in China too?
Yeah, I think it'll definitely happen. I mean, you see just within the labor force, there's a lot of people moving around. You look at a lot of the people that came to work for us in Abu Dhabi, they went back to China with a tremendous amount of experience. But when you have a big attraction open that suddenly raises the bar, Qinlong's a good example of that, and of course, that talent's going to spread to other places, and now the bar is now raised, the quality level is increased, and then hopefully overall the attractions get much better and much safer and much cleaner and a much better guest experience.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mark, do you have any other thoughts about?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say, we kind of agree that this is a real interesting opportunity. We've been watching it and can't wait because it really, to give more breathing room to the ability to invest in the park. I mean, every time you look at a Chinese park and you look at comps, for the longest time you could never find anything that was over 200 RMB, and the yields, like we said, were you do the economic math and you couldn't afford any kind of investment level that we were expecting, so they didn't end up going with different local parks or something to make the numbers work. But if you can set that high bar, it just has so much breathing room for legitimate investment levels in additional parks. And I think you're already seeing some of that. I mean, the great thing is you're seeing a preview of that. I mean, you already see prices, the Wuhan Wanda during the weekend is priced at 400 RMB, doubled. And that, on a straight exchange rate basis, that translates into about 65. But in China, there's also purchase price parity, which is really internally it feels more like a 4.4 exchange rate. So that price is like an $80, $90 price. Now, it's not proven whether that's actually going to work, but the ability to do that is good. And we always say in China it's interesting because they always build the biggest and the fastest, but they want to buy the best. And when you look at some of the consumer research outside of entertainment, they'll spend and overspend for what's perceived as the best, especially what's visible. But then on other things, they're very practical. They won't overspend if they're not getting that. So with Disney being able to set that bar and be kind of that position, it could be a real exciting time, like we said, chapter 3.
Well, I guess this all works if you have the depth of the market to absorb all of this. And some places you wouldn't. I mean, in Europe, with your Disneyland, there was a depth of market, and the theme park industry was sort of hadn't developed fully in some ways. But China is even deeper, right? I mean, like Chris was saying, there's all these cities with over 1 million people, and Wanda wants to spend all this money. So,
Well, high-speed rail takes enormous markets and makes them enormouser.
right. New term for China.
Yeah.
Enormouser.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and so when you just think of that region that Shanghai anchors, there's a lot of parks there today. There'll be new parks coming in. Chris mentioned the Wanda and going to sort of those secondary locations, but sort of within that greater region, Wanda has a big project plan for Wuxi, and that will benefit relative to reference pricing proximity, and there'll be more projects across all of those sort of perimeter cities that are part of that larger 300+ million within a 2-hour travel time.
Right.
I think another aspect that will be interesting, although it'll take a little time, is the reinvestment model that you had mentioned. One of the things you see in not only entertainment products, but almost every product in China is a big push in the beginning and no real concern for the follow-up. It was very transaction-oriented, probably because it's driven by the residential, where they'll have talking with a landscape architect who designed the most amazing garden that was part of an apartment residential complex, and he came back 6 months later and they turned off the water and everything died. And it was very emblematic of this big push to get it done, but then moving on. And I think the idea that it'll bring in and show them a style of continuing the experience, not done when it opens, which could be very good overall for the industry.
Right. Anyone in the audience have any thoughts or questions about the impact of Disney Shanghai, China? Yes.
Yeah. Al Cross, or you may want to comment on this, because he said something to me this morning was quite wise, which is an anomaly by itself. But, Electrosonic was in China early 2000s, and frankly, our venture failed, and we pulled out of China for a lot of reasons. But Al said something kind of resonated with me because he said, you really have to design and offer products for knowing your audience at that particular time. And we went in with a high-quality solution into China, thinking we can sell professional services at high quality and professional systems like we do to Disney and Universal. But we failed miserably because nobody could afford it. The audience wasn't ready for it. They weren't ready for a company like ours. So I honestly believe we pulled out, and we're just kind of pausing and waiting until the bars are risen, Chinalong and some of these other parks who are raising their own bars. But when Disney hits, in my personal opinion, that bar is going to be set pretty high. And I think you're right. It's going to cause the competition to, we think we need to spend more money. We need higher quality services, higher quality design. And at that time, maybe I'll be ready to get back into China, where my services might match the marketplace. But the lesson learned for me and for others who want to listen is, know your marketplace, know your audience at that particular time, and offer what the audience wants to buy, not what you want to shoehorn into their reality.
Right. That's a really good point. Applies to all the services that we provide in this room.
Adam said it wasn't really a question.
No, that's a comment. So great.
I've got a actual question here. You talked about how these parks, Disney Shanghai may influence the economics, which everybody's interested in. What about the visitation patterns, which is the other lever and the other concern in that market, is that how stepwise or how big those peaks are and how small the valleys are. Do you see these mega parks changing the visitation patterns in the market?
It seems to be coming from two sources. One, parks are looking at how they can accommodate higher peaks. For key holidays, Golden Week, but also I think that given the stress that it puts on tourism demand as it circulates around the country, the government is also reframing how they want to schedule those holidays to try to spread out that domestic visitation. And so there's actually a response at the state level to understand how policy in the future relating to holidays could redistribute some of those loads, which can really crush the attractions in those 2 weeks.
probably some case study lessons too. I mean, I know big danger is assuming that China is like Japan, like Korea and any of the other places. But you did see some of the destination parks in those areas, you know, just by their sheer drawing power, kind of move away from the peaks that some of the local attractions saw, just because the demand for that. So I think you'll see that, but I do think it's going to take more time. I mean, there really is just this pattern in China that's not going to change overnight. And when people are free, everyone's free to do stuff, and they're okay with being in a place with 100,000 other people. They're used to it, and they don't like it, but they do it.
Good. Any other questions on? Yes.
Hi, I'm Brian Eagles from Worldbuildr Sonic. It was recently reported in the press that at Disneyland Shanghai that Disney had to invest another $800 million into the park to complete the development of that. How does that drive the ticket prices, and is that just are they assuming that it's a longer return on investment, or how does that economically change the feasibility of the project?
That's a great question. I think it's actually one of our slides. We actually have the background. We want to talk about mega parks, mega budgets. I think one of the challenges is that when we do the economics and the business plan, we try to categorize in sort of clean buckets of different scales of projects. And so you have focused family and children's parks, you have regional parks, you have major parks, and you have mega parks. And people have 4 groups, 5 groups. But there's always been this top classification where the economics are the most challenging, where you're spending billions of dollars. And that really can only happen in a few places because you need a long list of success factors to make that achievable. The first, and why I think you can see this happening in China, is that you have a tremendous amount of state support. And so these big projects are essentially public-private partnerships, and you'll get essentially direct investment through state or state-owned enterprise, that blurry line between developers and the state, to make this even a consideration. And then you have enormous land that can be made available to create a much larger real estate development that includes much higher performing from investment return, commercial, residential, large, 20 square kilometers of land. And so we've all seen lots of projects where the theme park is their key negotiating tool to secure that much larger development program. And so it puts a lot of stress to have even bigger sites with much more diversified real estate and a lot more direct support. And so all of those things coming together, China's sort of uniquely positioned to be able to provide that. And it makes it one of the few places that can even consider the budgets that are being put forward, because it used to be that we thought, $1 billion project was big, a $2 billion project was big. Now we're looking at $4+ billion as being big. And it really is a difficult set of economics, because we would classify things with the investment per attendee. Was it $150, $200, $250? Now it's between $300 and $400. And so that puts a lot of pressure on price. It puts a lot of pressure on related development. And I think there's sort of big questions as to, if you reset the bar to $4+ billion for your main gate, that could probably only happen in a few places. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think the financing is always a multi-layered cake on these things, like Matt's talking about. You have to have public sector investment in infrastructure and land, because you're not going to be able to carry that and get a return on investment. So you've got to have that layer of the cake. You've got the operator, investor, brand group that comes in and provides equity. Then you've got debt financing that comes in. And I think you really need special circumstances to make all that work. And the special circumstances are when building a $3 or $4 billion park, it creates a massive economic impact in the region. It puts the region on the map. It draws tourism. And probably one of the more important things is it raises the land value all around the park. So you get tremendous land value out of the real estate that's developed around the park. That's really the biggest, once we get beyond the subsidies and the financing, that's probably the biggest economic driver. And it's not just theme parks, it's happening with cultural districts. We're working on a project in Hawaii right now, which has a performing arts theater, an arena, and an exhibition center that needs to basically be scrapped and redone because it was built in the 60s. Well, the way that's going to happen is we're going to sell or lease parcels for high-rise residential on the property, and that's going to fund these other developments. So we've kind of gone beyond. In the old days, I can speak to like 30 plus years ago, we used to just do the theme park numbers, and it all worked. Now, you need all the things Matt was talking about to really make it pencil out. You guys, Mike, have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Disney Shanghai is going to be probably unique. I think a great equivalent would be the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. That in some ways it's coming out. This is going to be successful, and they're going to invest as much as it takes. My understanding was, taking a lesson from Disney Hong Kong, you had to come out with enough content, and they were going through and very excited and knowing you really did need to have the capacity in there, and it's going to get invested, it's going to happen, but that really is in some ways, like you said, this is such high profile that the central government, is going to make sure, whether it's push comes to shove, that it's going to open and it's going to be great. It may not happen in every case.
Right, which loosens that need for an investment return, makes it unlikely that this is a model for almost anything else in any market that doesn't have that unique confluence of support. And so, one of the concerns from the economic perspective of these projects is it resets the bar, it creates a sort of inflation in terms of what can be achieved, and there'll be fantastic experiences delivered, but it doesn't give you the next prototype for other markets that can't support that. And so I think that there's still opportunities to rethink that experience for other markets that still could support great entertainment, but it's not going to be able to match sort of the success factors and the capital contribution that will make this. This is, could be a one-off.
Right. Mike, I'm interested in hearing from you when we're talking about mega projects and mega budgets. On the operating side of things, it has to be an incredibly challenging thing. I mean, when you're building, it's like building a city, right? I mean, what particular challenges do we face in operations in these sorts of big projects?
I mean, there's plenty of them, believe me. When I look back at some of the things like using Yas Island in Abu Dhabi, for example, I mean, you're building an entire island with mega infrastructure, with 10-lane highway, F1 track, hotels, a $1.5 billion theme park, all in one location. So when you start looking at how all these pieces work together to accomplish the bigger goal, and that's kind of an interesting thing about these projects, and going back to when you have this close government and private sector kind of connection. Like you take Yas Island, and everybody asks Ferrari World, it's $1.5 billion. How is it ever going to make its money back? Well, it was never designed to, because when you look at the overall impact to this city and region, which that's a unique scenario because you have a country with a ruling family and a majority of the infrastructure from hotels to airlines are somehow connected with that. So when you look at it together, it makes a lot of sense. But operationally, there is a lot of challenges to make sure that in order to accomplish the overall goals that, one piece, even though may not be as successful as another, working together to make sure that it all kind of accomplishes the bigger goal.
And today, I mean, that's a good example. $1.5 billion, that's a mega project. Although I think half of that was in the roof. But to just hire the people, the line people, and the management, and all of that, how is that accomplished? And does the local market have enough bodies for that, or do you have to import them?
No, in that case, I mean, everything was pretty much brought in. I mean, and we're seeing this in other markets too that we're working in, but I mean, you start looking at, you're bringing in 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people. Well, you're bringing them in from other countries, throughout the world. You have to house them, you have to feed them. There's a different way of approaching these things than you normally see here. Here, you have an employee, you get them on your payroll, and at the end of the day, they leave and go somewhere, and you don't worry about it. And these mega projects, in particular, you have to, they're pretty much part of the project 24 hours a day, even in their off time. So, where they live, their activities, transportation, all of these things to make these type of projects happen have to be considered.
Right. Great. Okay. Any other questions or comments about mega projects? I'd kind of like to move it on because we're getting a little short on time. I've got some more topics to discuss. I don't see anyone. Okay. One thing we want to talk about, guys, was integrated resorts. We've seen how combining sometimes gaming, hospitality, themed attractions, particularly in Southeast Asia, Macau, places like that, is sort of a trend. Maybe bringing intellectual properties and international brands in. What's the latest on that? Mark, do you have any comments about what we see in that particular sector?
Probably the most interesting, air quoted, thing that's happening recently is basically the corruption crackdown that the president of China has implemented. Macau, which had been growing at double-digit rates in casino volume it was almost to the point where 1 month of Macau equaled all year in Las Vegas. The scale was just phenomenal. And over the last year now, it's dropped over 40% because there's really this new anti-corruption push, and no one wants to be seen. Now, that has implications for Macau. Some of it may be okay in the sense that they really want it to be, less dependent on VIP gambling, which is 75% of the revenue. But it also is allowing a little more life for some of the other places, like you mentioned. The Philippines is actually one of the ones that, for the longest time, everyone was really questioning whether something like that would work at that investment level. But now you see that, it's actually picking up a little bit because, now you can't go to Macau. Where do you go? You can go to some of these others, and even Korea, which is foreigner only. You see some of the pickup, and I think that's generated a lot more interest in development. You see Genting looking at Jeju and the stuff that's being done right on the island in Korea, Japan. I'm kind of back and forth on Japan because I've been looking and hearing about casinos there for probably my whole career. But they have gotten very close and closer than they ever gotten. And then recently didn't quite get it in this diet. But the idea of looking at Singapore as a model, which I think is good for our industry because they see it as a way to drive the introduction of some entertainment product that may not necessarily be justified on its own economics, like you saw in Singapore.
You see, just on the topic of gaming, I know that's one of your areas of expertise. But do you see any particular growth areas? What's going on in Atlantic City and Vegas? And are there any areas the audience should be looking at in that sector?
Well, I think for the themed entertainment industry, I think still Asia is the most interesting because you see growth opportunities evolving, and you do see the integrated resorts. Atlantic City is still really being challenged by regional developments. That there's been this expansion of gaming by states and such to generate revenue, and it's less of a destination, and they've tried, and there's just fundamental issues with land acquisition and doing that. Luckily, Las Vegas has had critical mass, so they've been able to come back with the overall scale of investment that you can't replicate that. Gaming is still a critical but not as major proportion of the revenue there, and there's still a need to differentiate. So there's still some interesting opportunities for thematic design and entertainment in that market. You do see a lot more interest in projects there. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the resorts world's open. Is that kind of the thing that starts everything, or does that need time to be absorbed before a few other things come online?
Okay. Great. Any other comments about integrated resorts?
Well, I think it's just a prior comment about special circumstances that can give you additional investment opportunities. Integrated resorts, particularly with the Singapore model, as Mark mentioned, is concentrating that investment. So compared to other markets like Vegas or Atlantic City that develop a little bit more organically with a lot more single properties, when you focus it into a few properties and then have tourism or cultural development or entertainment objectives, it creates more opportunities for investment. So if Japan were to move forward, the numbers they put that would potentially be invested in those few resorts would be enormous. Right. A big budget spent for associated entertainment.
Right. Good. Okay, we did have let's see, how are we doing? We're okay. We can do, anyone else want to comment about integrated resorts, gaming, questions on that particular topic? Roll the dice.
How backrack works.
I don't see any. Oh, no, there's one.
Original word you'd hear from casino owners was that they didn't want entertainment of any kind, particularly in Macau. They just wanted to open up gambling tables, smoking rooms, and bring in girls, and they were done. Is the shift really on now to entertainment? They didn't seem to, last time we talked to them, they didn't seem terribly interested.
Well, they're interested in a sense that the central government wants to see more diverse visitation. I mean, gambling is not good. It's seen as dangerous. So, I mean, the revenue and what happens, it's almost irrelevant to the business model of the resort there. And getting, two things drive that: getting approval for tables, because you put a table in, all of a sudden it starts printing money, and then also the flow of visas allowing the mainland chiming in. Big issue with bringing money into, and Union Pay, which is a way to bring in. People would basically go in, buy a Rolex watch, and then give it back to the store owner. They buy with Union Pay, they give it back to the store owner and refund it, and that's the way they have $5,000 to go to the casino. They cut that off, and I mean it's kind of crazy, but all the projects do have some level of entertainment. Again, it's really a way to put window dressing on getting stuff approved, but to differentiate and do that also. I mean, you have enough critical mass there that you do need differentiation. You can't just build another good-looking building, but the economics there are just crazy.
Okay.
Visitation or visitation.
Oh, the length of stay.
I don't know specifically. The biggest hit really has been the VIP, which turns out to be a small portion of its total number. I mean, one VIP visitor is about a $25,000 or so person. So even though the number is enormous, they really only accounted for a very small percentage of visitation. The good thing is that they build all the hotel rooms, and once you have hotel rooms, you can drive more families and visitors in with that room. I think the overall numbers have not changed as much as the revenue numbers have changed, but I don't know specifically. I know for the past year.
Still well behind like Vegas in terms of the length of stay.
Oh, length of stay, yeah. I mean, it's still a 1 day plus.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, we have time for one more topic, and we were thinking of talking a bit. I think everyone wants to know what's really happening in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and those places. I mean, of course, we saw the massive surge back a decade ago, and we all were hopping on planes and going over there, and then everything crashed and burned overnight, and then now things are starting to pick up again. Then, what do we think? Mike, why don't you start us off, since that's your geography expertise. What do you think's happening? Are we in for another big surge, or is it going to be a house of cards like the last one?
No, I mean, I truly believe we're in for a big surge. I mean, if you look at the level of commitment in these projects and where they kind of are, of course, there's a little bumps on the road, but I do believe the majority of them are going to get built. I mean, and I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about two different markets because they're kind of interesting, but kind of driven by the same kind of principles. let's take Dubai and Abu Dhabi, for example. Of course, there's the Expo 2020 coming to Dubai, and then, Abu Dhabi has its own 2030 plan for increasing tourism. So when you start looking at the projects that are occurring there, it's very interesting. Starting with Abu Dhabi, I mean, you look at Ferrari World, where I was the general manager before I moved back to U.S. I mean, year-on-year attendance increases were huge. That park's been tremendously successful in generating tourism. So now they're at the point of they're looking to add a 40% increase in attraction capacity with 7 new rides. So you see that as a very positive sign for where things are heading. In 2013, we opened Yas Water World. A lot of people rate that as the #2 best water park in the world. Tremendously successful in its first couple years. And it kind of goes along with the trend of the region, really pushing the limits of what people have done before and creating these game changers in these projects. So when you look at that park, it's it's something that you'll probably not see for a long time. Warner Brothers, which that's been on the books for quite some time, but I can't really say too much because I'm under non-disclosure. But when you look at the latest news, that is scheduled to open in 2018, and there's been news in the media that bids are going out to main contractors as we speak. So that's a huge project that's occurring. You look at Dubai, you have the Galladaris, World's of Adventure theme park with the Marvel and Cartoon Network. That's slated to be, when it's built out, the world's largest theme park, indoor theme park, supplanting Ferrari World, with 1.5 million square feet. I mean, it's being built. The structure's up. There's roller coasters on the ground, so that is moving along. Of course, then the mega project. When you look at what's really going to push Dubai's tourism to the next level, you start talking about the Dubai Parks and Resorts development, namely Motion Gate, which is a theme park that uses DreamWorks and Sony IP. You're talking 4 million square feet, so quite a big development. Bollywood, which is going to be a totally unique kind of theme park based around the Bollywood type of Hollywood, Bollywood movie industry, which, when you look at the amount of visitation from India and the subcontinent that comes to Dubai and the region, I mean, I think that's going to be a tremendously successful project. And then, of course, you have Merlin with Legoland that's in the process of being constructed now. Six Flags that's been announced and is supposed to open in 2017. You start looking at the other things that are in that development. They call it Riverland. It's a big RD&E that's themed out to colonial and French and 1950s America. A big resort. And then, of course, to wrap it up, if they didn't already have enough, you're going to have the world's largest Ferris wheel. That's a $270 million giant wheel, 689 feet.
So I see a lot of sand from up there.
Yeah, I was out there. It was pretty funny. I was out there a couple months ago, and they already have like one of the world's largest mobile cranes to lift the base structure up. So they're starting to work, and then they realize, well, hey, this isn't enough. So then they brought the second world's largest crane to lift it up, because it's so big and never been done. It's just incredible. But so if you look at the UAE and what they're doing, I mean, a lot of it is really driven by IPs and some of the newest, latest, and greatest. So it's going to be a really interesting market to see. The other one that is we're seeing a lot of opportunity and projects coming online is Qatar. For many years it was a joke, and these guys can probably can tell you. We would receive RFP after RFP from Qatar, and you would submit, and it would go into the black hole, and you never knew what was going to happen. So every time you got one, you were like, hey, should I submit or not? So we kept on submitting them. Some of them have been in the black hole for a couple years, and probably in the last 6 months, so many of those projects have immediately are sprung back to life and are now viable projects. But it's a totally different kind of project, which is unique, in my opinion. Starting off with Angry Birds, for example, that's obviously a rodeo, Angry Birds, but it's more of like it's a smaller, it's a FEC type of attraction. So it's really suited to the market size. These attractions are really designed to be repeatable attractions because when you start looking at Qatar, they have very few tourists and a very few residents when you look at the bigger picture. So then they come up with some other unique things, which I don't have a picture for, but there's a company that's doing the Angry Birds that's come up with a Juniverse concept. It's a dynamic learning kind of theme park, similar to a Kidzania or a Kids Mondo, but it's like a, I don't know, generation 6 or 7 of that concept. But that is really with the intention of driven repeat visitation as well as getting some education to the local residents. And then one of the most interesting ones for me, because I'd never heard of this kind of concept, was it's called Virtuosity. It's really like it's a gaming concept, like a video gaming. It's really designed to take people like teens and people that play video games out of their homes, and put them in a big arena where it becomes much more engaging and they can interact with each other. So rather than sitting by your console at your home, now you're in an arena with 150 other people competing, and there's a huge sport around it. I mean, some of these people that are in this sport, I mean, make a tremendous amount of money and are celebrities in their own right. So it's a very kind of unique concept that's designed to be real repeatable. And then, of course, you have Kidzania opening up in that market as well as Kids Mondo, and so it's, I don't know, it's a very interesting market. You see the mega projects in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and then you see smaller edutainment, more repeatable experiences being built in Qatar. And those things are going in is not only for the locals, but to help support their 2022 World Cup bid. So the whole region as a whole, I mean, has a tremendous amount of promise, and I think we're going to see some very exciting things out of that region.
Great. I guess one last question I wanted to ask you guys. I remember we did a study like 20 years ago in Dubai. We told the government, you're overbuilt in office, you're overbuilt in retail, you're overbuilt in residential, you're overbuilt in themed attractions, I mean, on and on. They're overbuilt in everything. And that was about 6 months before the market crashed. You guys got any opinions that you'd be comfortable sharing with Dubai and Abu Dhabi, all of the stuff planned there? Or is it too much? Can the market grow to accommodate all of these? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It'll be the best case study that if you build it, they will come.
Right.
That's it. I think it's a challenge to take so many projects online within a short time frame. I think Dubai has been successful building ahead. So all those sort of projects you mentioned, sort of too much capacity in every category, and that hasn't been driven by fundamental economics. That's sort of a state-sponsored shift to diversify an economy, build a trade center, and so I think they have that same perspective. And so it's someone who's focused on, does this project make sense economically? Will it absorb as fast as we might want it to? I certainly think there will be challenges to have so many gates open at one time. Now, given the curve that they're on, given the infrastructure and promotion that they're putting behind Expo 2020, I do think that there is, the market continues to grow, and so I think there's a timing issue. And I'm sure if you talk to 10 people, they'll have 10 different perspectives on that timing.
Right. Okay, well said. Thank you. Any questions or comments about the Middle East? We've got 20 seconds.
So make them short.
Yeah. I don't see anyone. Okay. Well, I guess that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody.